This is Tell Me What to Read, powered by Booktopia. I'm Nick Wasiliev, and I'm excited for today's interview because today, June 15th, was the launch of the 2022 Emerging Writers Festival. A few weeks ago, we had Artistic Director Ruby Rose Marsh and Ambassador Janine Lane on discussing the festival following the announcement of its program. But today, I'm delighted to sit down with another author who will also be taking part in the festival. And my guest is Mykaela Saunders. She is a Koori and Lebanese writer, teacher, community researcher, a 2021 Next Chapter recipient, and she has won the Elizabeth Jolly Short Story Prize, the National Indigenous Story Award, the Uduru Nunukal Indigenous Poetry Prize, and the Grace Marion Wilson Emerging Writers Prize for nonfiction, amongst many others. Her latest anthology, This All Come Back Now, catalogues First Nations speculative fiction and includes contributors such as Adam Thompson, Ellen Van Neeren, Karen Wilde, and 2022 Stellar Prize winner Evelyn Araluen. Mykaela, welcome to Tell Me What to Read.
Thanks, Nick. How are you?
I'm fantastic. It's great to have you here. It's great to talk about this upcoming festival and also chat about your new anthology, which came out last month. So before I talk to you about your book, I just want to, ask you about, the fact that you're involved with the festival this year. Chatting with Ruby Rose and Janine a few weeks back, their desire to, build on not just the writer's side of the festival, but also include all the multiple different art forms, the painting, visual arts, plays, etc. Honestly, it's incredible. What's it like to be, just included in such a festival?
Oh, look, it's really lovely. I'm pretty new writing, so I'm still, obviously an emerging writer myself. I haven't written my own work yet. But the last few years, I have participated in the festival as a punter and have been really impressed with it. And particularly over the last few years during the pandemic, I know it was really hard for a lot of organisations, but Emerging Writers Festival did really well with, kind of transitioning to online. And it just meant that we were still able to, learn all these amazing things from amazing writers and hear them speak and perform. And this year, my first year being part of it as a performer, as a curator as well, has been really great. Ruby Rose and Greer have been really great to work with. And this is my first time curating an event, which is late night literature. And that's been too because, we're all just learning and I'm learning from Ruby Rose and Greer as we go. They've been really supportive.
Yeah, the takeaway I got from when we did our chat with Ruby Rose was that they've come to realize over the last 2 years as they kind of overcame challenge after challenge after challenge with the festival, was that how important their work actually was, how important the place of expression, this place to express yourself that the Emerging Writers Festival provides is, the arts in this space is, and it feels more relevant now as a space and as a place for not just writers, but all forms of art to be able to express itself. It's been fantastic to see how it has grown and how it is coming back stronger than ever with the festival this year.
Yeah, and I think it's especially important for emerging writers, to find a kind of writing community. I think, speaking for myself, I come from a life where, nobody in my family or friends group or community are writers. So it's been really important to connect with writers and think, initiatives like the Emerging Writers Festival help that to happen. And especially over the pandemic where everyone was so kind of physically isolated, but I guess socially online, people came together a lot more. It really helped. I don't know, it really helped me, and it helped a lot of other writers that I've spoken to as well.
Well, it definitely gives you the chance to put together fantastic works of art and stuff like that. And I want to touch and ask you about your anthology that came out last month. This All Come Back Now. We'll link to it in the description for all of our listeners, so you can go and check it out. But I just want to start by saying you got some bloody good storytellers here, some incredible contributors as part of this anthology. How did this come about, and also why focus specifically on speculative fiction?
Well, because speculative fiction is the best kind of fiction, I would say, as a lifelong nerd for it. But the last few years, as part of my Doctor of Arts project, I was studying Indigenous speculative fiction. And I really wanted to do this anthology because I knew that there were Indigenous spec fic anthologies in North America, Canada, but we didn't have our own. So I wanted to create our own for our own people. So yeah, just over the last few years, reading a lot of Indigenous spec fic, really trying to get my handle on the field and what's happening, and just seeing an explosion of it the last few years. I thought that the time was right. So how did it come about? Well, I pitched the idea to UQP, and they were supportive, but they did warn me that, anthologies don't tend to do very well, and speculative fiction wasn't doing well. And I think they were just kind of letting me know to not expect too much. But so yeah, I applied for some funding. I got a grant from OzCo, and I was able to then commission writers and pay writers and pay the amazing cover artist and Nungala Creative, and pay Jenna Lee, the book designer. So yeah, so this time last year, I was still reading submissions. I hadn't even chosen yet. I had been emailing writers that I admired, writers whose work that I'd read and I knew, they would fit in here. But I also emailed writers that I people who I didn't know if they wrote spec fic or not, but just feeling out those waters. And I was pleasantly surprised. A lot of people were really on board and supportive, even though everyone was far too busy. This time last year, we were in our second year of the pandemic, and it was not a good time for a lot of people. But yeah, people were really supportive and they did want to be involved. And that is why our contributor list is so amazing.
It certainly is. This contributor list is insane. Some of the names that you've been able to pick up. We were also talking, just before we started recording, about not just the fact that the list is so extensive, but the stories and the contributions themselves. You cover a lot of stylistic, ground in this anthology. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so speculative fiction, for those of those listeners who aren't quite up with the term or what people mean by it, I know it means different things to different people, but to me, it's like a big umbrella basket that kind of holds all the other subgenres of like sci-fi, fantasy, horror, ghost stories, superhero, alternate history, futurism, all the kind of genres where, give it or take a few tweaks of reality, these stories could maybe be true. And of course, spec fic it means different things across cultures too, because, to some cultures, including our own cultures, some of these stories wouldn't be passed out into fiction or fantasy. Some of them are just the way we experience life, especially when it comes to some of the ghost stories. So yeah, that's a long way of saying that for this anthology, I didn't want to, lean too heavily on one of the subgenres. I wanted to have it as a real mixed bag so that anyone reading it could find something they loved, whether it's a strange magic realism story like the one written by Karen Wilde, or a story set 3,000 years into the future like the one written by Archie Weller, or one that's just set in a small town pub like the one by Lockie Little. Yeah, just something for everyone, and I think we've achieved it.
You certainly have, by the sounds of this list and by the look of it. I want to ask about how First Nation storytelling just translated into this anthology in the different ways and styles and forms. Were there any submissions that you looked at and you went, wow, like this has really caught me, this has blindsided me in terms of what it talks about, the subjects it talks about, the relevant, the way, and more specifically, the way it does it in such a unique and creative way? Were there any that just kind of really just went, wow, you're making me look at the topics that I want to cover in this anthology in ways that even I hadn't comprehended when I started down the process of making it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know this isn't the answer you're looking for, but all of the stories did this to me in different ways. Whether a story made me cack up laughing, because there's a lot of evil humor in some of these stories, or whether it just gutted me and made me feel really grim and, desolate, or whether it just made me, think about different futures and different possibilities. All of the stories did this to me in different ways, and that's why I chose them all. I read about 60 submissions for this anthology, and I was only able to choose 20. So, and that's not to say that the ones that were sent in were bad or anything. It was just a matter of, kind of choosing the stories that I think, that I think spoke to not just me, but having the stories speak to each other, so that it created a bigger story with them all combined. All of the stories are incredible. All the writers are incredible, whether they've been writing spec fic for years or, some of the writers in here, this is their first story in an anthology, which is pretty incredible. And I was just as impressed by their stories as I was by the writers who have been doing it for years. So, yeah.
Well, it's awesome that touching on what we're going to talk about in terms of the Emerging Writers Festival and the event that you'll be involved in. You'll be doing a late night literature event with a collection with some of the contributors for this anthology. Can you tell us a little bit about this upcoming event? For our listeners, I'll include it in the description. But yeah.
So late night literature. So I am curating this event for Emerging Writers Festival. So it's not a panel discussion as such. We've been promoting the book over the last month that it's been out, and we've had a few panels at Sydney Writers Festival, Brisbane Writers Festival, Avid Reader, the Wheeler Centre. But this is a different event. This is an evening of reading. So we have 5 contributors. We have Timmer Ball, we have Kayla Murray, Jasmine McGaggy, Catherine Gledhill Tucker, and Lisa Fuller. And all of their stories in the anthology are quite different. Lisa and Caleb's stories are what you would call like a bush horror story. So they're going to be reading first because we don't want to scare everyone too close to bedtime. We also have Jasmine McGacky's story, which is a ghost story, but it's a bit of a dry and wry story. And that's a delight. And then we have, I'm trying to think, we have Timmer Ball, who has written a really weird, interesting story that's set in the future, maybe not too far from now. Now, Timmer's normally known as a non-fiction writer and a poet, and this is her first speculative fiction, and it was really exciting to work with her on it. And then finally, we have Catherine Gledhill Tucker, who, again, this is her first spec fic story. And her story actually closes the anthology. And it's a meditation on what a post-human future could look like, involving artificial intelligence and, I guess, climate catastrophe and musings about the end of the world. It's a very grim and very heavy and very beautiful piece. And so, all of the writers will be reading or performing from their stories. And I know for a fact, having read all the stories a million times and spoken to the writers, that it is going to be a wonderful evening.
Yeah, it absolutely sounds like it will be. The chance to actually, it's no longer just on the page. It's them bringing their own inflections and their own perspective and their own method of performance to the work that they have provided for this anthology, which just gives. I always find whenever you have an author who is describing it or describing telling their story to you face to face, orally, it's so much more. They add another inflection. There's another dimension that comes out in the way that they present it. So it sounds absolutely fascinating.
Absolutely, I agree. I've got to tell you, so as I said, over the last few weeks, we've been promoting the anthology, and we've had different panels and events. And at each one, I've asked the writers to read a bit of their story, and every time it makes me a little bit emotional because, as I said, I've read these stories over and over, throughout the last year or so in choosing them and editing them, and then copy editing, and then just rereading them when the book came out. But to hear them have life breathed into them by the creator is just something special. And yeah, most of the times I've gotten a little bit emotional about it.
Does it make you look at I'm assuming it would make you look at the work a little bit differently from when you would have said, yes, this is what's going in here. Yes, this is what's going in here. Like seeing them actually perform it live, what I imagine would just make you would suddenly, having seen them do it a few times, you would go, oh, suddenly I get a whole different appreciation for the work that I selected.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, whenever we're all reading, we're always reading using the voice in our head. But I feel like once you've heard the author read their own work, after that you start to read their work in their voice, because how their music and their rhythm and their inflections, and I think that's really special. It's like their voice is now joining your voice in your head.
Yeah, it sounds absolutely fantastic. And for all of our listeners, this event, this late night literature event, will be taking place on Wednesday, the 22nd of June, from 9 p.m. to 10 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. So you can be sure to check that out. For all of out of curiosity, Mykaela, I know that we talked about other events in the festival as well, because I mean there's dozens and dozens and dozens of events this season, this festival. What are you going to get the chance to go and check out other events yourself? And if so, which ones are you most excited to see?
Yeah, well, here's the thing. During a period of Emerging Writers Festival, I'll actually be teaching at Sydney Uni. I'll be teaching a winter school course that I teach every year. So, but that doesn't mean I have to miss out on anything, because fortunately, there's still a lot of online stuff that I can check out. And I'm actually really grateful to Emerging Writers Festival for continuing to provide online stuff, because it means that people aren't missing out. It means that, whether you can be there or not, you can still access the festival and the wealth of, knowledge and creativity that's there. So yeah, I was looking through the program the other day, and I definitely want to check out Professor Janine Lane's keynote address, because she's just an incredible thinker and writer and speaker. And she actually wrote the first critical review of our anthology a few weeks ago. It's out with the Sydney Review of Books, and it's an incredible reading of the anthology. It absolutely floored me and humbled me to read it. And so I love Janine Lane's mind, and I think her keynote will just be incredible. And also there's an event called Critics Corner, which I would love to check out. It features writers or critics that I really admire. So Katrina Menzies-Pike from the Sydney Review of Books, Claire Cowell, Carissa Lee, Michael Sun, and Oliver Reason, all of who have written really incredible critical stuff over the last few years. There's another event called Hot Off the Small Press, which I'm going to check out because that's also online. And that's just people who are involved with small presses like Jed and Sick Leave and Glom Press and others. And they're all going to be talking about, their experiences and their work there. And one more I'm going to mention is lunchtime literature, accessing the industry. Now, this is a topic that's close to my heart, because as someone who does come from, a very working class background, and, as I mentioned, I don't have, writers in my family, or we were talking about it before the podcast. It's the industry can be a bit inaccessible and baffling sometimes. So I'm really glad that, we've got three incredible writers: Dan Hogan, Jingla Kuyan, and Julia Rose Buck, and they're all going to be talking about, how to come into the industry and how to kind of get your foot in the door. And Yeah, even though I do feel like my foot is already in the door, I still love to hear the perspectives of working class writers, and writers who have been traditionally marginalized.
Mm.
Yeah, and I also just admire their poetry and their writing in general. So they're the events that I'm definitely going to check out.
Yeah, I'm so glad you bring up the lunchtime the lunchtime discussions. I think in this day and age, so many people always talk about, oh, I've got a book in me, or I have this story in me, and they often go, but I don't know where the hell to start in terms of getting into the industry, or actually putting it down on the page, and then actually getting it to a publisher or to a group that'll help you out. It's fantastic to share that knowledge around and let people know, well, no, if you do want to tell a story and you do have a book in you, then here are the ways to do it. I'm really glad that you mentioned that one, because it's
super important.
It is. We like to finish off our podcast by kind of asking some fun, kind of bookish questions and having a bit of a laugh. So I'll kind of keep it simple and to the point.
I don't have a sense of humor, so.
Well, it doesn't necessarily have to. We're always on the sentimental type. I always like my sentimental questions. What is the perfect idea of a night with a book for you?
Oh, that's easy. Going to bed early and reading. As much as I would love to kind of block out time to read every day, people always want to email me and ask me questions or talk to me on podcasts, or there's always other things to do. So for me, the only kind of reading time I really get is when I go to bed. So I try and go to bed a bit early so I can get my time with my book, because I don't bring my phone into the bedroom. So it's just me and the book. And yeah, for that reason, just going to bed early and getting stuck in.
Preach, absolutely. I do love either in front of a roaring fire or in bed is the place.
I get arrested if I lit a fire in my house.
You meet your favorite author of all time in a lift, just by curiosity. Who would it be, and what would you ask them if you have time for one question?
Well, it's actually Alexis Wright, who has an excerpt of her novel in our anthology. And I haven't met her before, but I did email her last year to ask if I could include an excerpt of the Swan book in the anthology. And I was terrified because, when you're writing to your favorite author, that's a pretty normal and healthy feeling, I think, to be terrified. But she was really lovely, and she was really supportive of the project, and so we have her excerpts in there. But if I ran into her in a lift, look, I would probably just introduce myself and ask her how her new book's going, because I know she has a new book coming out in October, and I'm very, very excited to read it. I'm excited whenever anything new of hers comes out.
Yeah, good pick. Love it. And then finally, last question. As you mentioned, you're going to be in Sydney working, and so you won't be able to attend any of the events in person. But if you could pick one event from the festival, but also one that, for example, merges other forms of art, be it music, visual art, the performance art, and you got the chance to see it in person, what event would you go to?
Well, look, I'm going to be really basic here, and I'm going to say the program launch, because I was actually part of it. But because I was on book tour at the time, I wasn't able to be there in person. So I actually recorded my piece through video and sent it in. But I was able to watch it online on the night, which was really great. Again, accessibility, amazing stuff. So I would say that, because there was 4 other writers. There was Shirtan, there was Anna Maria Gomides, and Tabani Tassab, and we were all given the prompt, good at being bad or good to be bad. And the way us 4 very different writers and performers kind of interpreted that theme and then ran with it are so incredible, because if you can actually watch the night on YouTube now, and all of our takes on the theme were very different, but they were all very great and they were all really clever. And I loved watching everybody, interpret it and perform their piece. And it was just really fun. Even though I wasn't physically there, I kind of felt I was there because I was able to watch it online.
A good answer. And it was a super fun program launch event. For all of our listeners, I'll actually include it in the description of our podcast, so you can check it out for yourself. It's a really fun way to, first of all, get a sense of what the Emerging Writers Festival is all about this year, but also just how much fun it actually was.
And you can also see me being incredibly cheesy and bad, but doing it intentionally. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I had a great time watching it, so no complaints here. But thank you so much. And again, thank you so much for coming on our podcast. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, but Mykaela, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you about your book, your involvement in the Emerging Writers Festival this year. I'm really excited to see how your late night literature event goes, and all the best as well for This All Come Back Now. I really hope that people check out this fantastic anthology and take the time to read all this incredible work that you've collated and put together with these incredible contributors. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nick. Thanks for having me.
So for all of our listeners, you can buy all of the books that were mentioned today in this podcast right now from booktopia.com.au. Emerging Writers Festival is started today on June 15th and runs until June 25th. So if you'd like to grab some tickets or find out when events are going, you can head to emergingwritersfestival.org.au. I'll include links to that as well as their social media in the description. We'll catch you on Friday for another special YA middle grade spectacular themed episode where we sit down with Tanya Hennessy and A.F. Stedman to talk about their respective books. Until then, thanks for listening and never stop reading.